white individuals who were breaking windows, burning buildings. And then in the media, it said that these were riots. Oh, these BIPOC people were out of control.
I cannot sit here and give you percentages. I can't give you data, but I can tell you what I've seen. The killing of black men, this has got to stop. And Black Lives Matter movement must go on.
Well, it's an opportunity to educate yourself by talking to someone like me who actually knows the research.
Oh man, I'm in luck. No, let's do it. Hi, my name is John Wood Jr. I'm an opinion columnist for USA Today, radio host with KBLA 1580. I'm a former nominee for Congress, former Republican nominee for Congress. More than anything, I'm probably known for my work as national ambassador for BraverAngels, which is America's largest grassroots cross-partisan organization working on bridging the partisan divide. Today, I'm here to talk about the history of Black Lives Matter. And I'm here in part because I have a little bit of a critical perspective on the impact of Black Lives Matter on America and on race relations and on public safety. The most important thing for me is the importance of being willing to listen to other people, being willing to embrace nuance, and accept the fact that you yourself might be wrong, as I might be wrong, on any number of things. So I'm looking forward to having a really good conversation here with the good folks I'm getting to meet today. And so for our first topic, BLM protests made cities less safe. So let's get into it. Yo!
How you doing, brother?
What's happening, Brother Justice? How you doing, man?
Good, man. Nice to meet you again.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, on the topic of if BLM made cities less safe, right?
Yeah.
I want to start out with a fact, and it's going to be coming from just not nation, but just LA in general.
Okay. Yeah.
The LAPD budget in 2020 from 2021 was $1.85 billion. That's more than some countries in Africa. Yeah. That's more than the economy of some countries in Africa. 1.85 billion, right?
Oh yeah, probably even outside of Africa.
Yes. Considering that their budget was 1.85 billion, my opinion is that what was happening from 2020 all the way until about 2022, it proved the inadequacies of public safety. If we were giving our tax dollars, we're going into the LAPD budget to make it at 1.85 billion, then in my opinion, from the protests, from the sit-ins, for things that were happening, because I was actually on the front lines every day organizing with some of my colleagues who got arrested for just speaking out. It proved to me that if we're spending that much money on police, one protest shouldn't turn into a quote unquote riot, which in my opinion, they weren't riots, they were just protests. But if we are giving a force that's supposed to protect people, which I know we're gonna disagree on that later on.
Yeah, we'll see.
Then I would say, why do we have police, right? If they're not protecting our communities, if they're not protecting the property in which police was formed, right? And to protecting property, not people. Police was formed to protect property, to protect people who are in the higher echelon. So that proves to me the inadequacies of the police department, right? If individuals think that they were riots or they were making people safe, then why are we spending money on police?
Right. Yeah, no, brother. I hear your challenge.
Yeah.
Let me step up to it. To your point about the inadequacies of law enforcement in Los Angeles in particular, although I'm sure this applies in many other places, man, brother, I would agree in many respects. I would also say though, it's a tremendously difficult project. Policing the biggest city in the world, particularly when you have a history in Los Angeles that is very much racially fraught. Let's be honest about it. I think, now look, I know a lot of cops, and I think I know a lot of good cops, right? But when you got folks, even if they're sort of well-intentioned, who are coming from starkly different cultural backgrounds, starkly different parts of the country, so on and so forth, and a lot of times, historically, what I believe has happened, there's a book that everybody should read called Ghetto Side. It's a little bit dated now, but it goes back to about 2008 or so in Los Angeles. Part of what it identifies is a system in which you've got a lot of the sort of most underperforming police officers assigned to the most dangerous territories because the most experienced and high-performing police officers are sent to the wealthier parts of Los Angeles, right? Now, there are heroic exceptions where you got veterans on the force who just commit themselves to trying to work in the hood because that's where they feel like they're needed. But even those parts of the department are under-resourced relative to the resources that go to cops that are patrolling in other areas. But there's an irony in that, though, see, because the thing is that there's the question of the quality of policing, but there is still a question of having adequate resources to actually be able to serve a given community. And I would argue that there's a problem on both ends. But while there's a qualitative problem with policing in many areas, especially in inner city areas and where people of color predominate, there's also a quantitative problem where many crimes don't get solved because you actually don't have enough police in many parts of the Black community in particular. And I don't know if this is your experience, but it's definitely my experience. When you talk to people's aunties and uncles and grandparents, that's generally the point of view a lot of them have, is that we actually need more police in many areas. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, if I may interrupt, I would just say that, whether it be in Watts or whether it be, Hawthorne or Compton, I would say there's more of a militarization of police there than we have in Beverly Hills or we have in Calabasas, right? And these communities are complaining on why there are so many other police forces around high schools, around even what we're seeing with ICE now, around Home Depots, around Carl's Jr.'s. And it's become a more so of a problem in these communities than of a feeling of safety. And I also want to get on the second topic, since we've already agreed, it looks like, when it comes to the inadequacies of public safety, is that during the BLM era, and like I said, I was fortunate enough to be out there and organize and mobilize and actually see a protest from A to Z.
Are you from LA yourself?
I'm from New York, but I was arrested. I was arrested during the BLM time.
If you're from New York, you know about it on both sides of the...
Oh yeah, definitely, yes.
Tough relationships with the cops.
Of course. But I was lucky enough to be arrested and understand the in and outs of how, I'm saying, the LAPD works when it comes to people who are using their First Amendment right. And what I seen, right, firsthand, is that we had some of our white allies stand in front of these protests and take the bullet, so to say, when it came to, getting arrested, when it came to, getting, I would say, hit with some bean bags. But what I also seen, which I wanted to inform you about, is that there were also white individuals who were breaking in windows, who were looting, who were burning down cars. And you know what the media blamed it on? Black individuals. They didn't blame it on white individuals. And I seen it with my own eyes when I was out there. It was white individuals masked up, right? Not showing their face, infiltrating different type of protests, breaking windows, burning buildings. And then in the media, it said that these were riots. Oh, these BIPOC people were out of control. What is going on? And it pains me because when I was out there every day, peaceful, right? I seen so many different people, Black, Asian, Mexican, diverse group of folks, not just Black folk. We were speaking about human rights. And I didn't see one individual within those groups throwing Molotov cocktails or breaking windows. It was only until I would say 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night where those individuals who were ill-meaning and were not a part of our groups, they would go and break out windows and throw Molotov cocktails. And I wanted to ask you about that. Did you see that? Did you hear about those infiltrators who were doing that in these groups?
Yeah. I think that you must be correct that there's a distinction to be made between people who are rioting and breaking and entering versus people who are actually out in the streets legitimately protesting.
Right.
But I think that on balance, I think that the culture of law enforcement could do a much better job, or at least, let me just put it like this. Whether it's possible or not, we still need to make it happen, right? to where law enforcement is able to relate to the community in ways that provide the environment and the space for trust to unfold. Right? Because I think that in general, there probably needs to be more cops in particularly inner city communities than there are. But if there are more cops, but less trust, then you're just pouring fuel on the fire, potentially. Right? So it's a complicated situation because on the one hand, crime does exist at a higher level in American inner cities than it does in the suburbs. I mean, now there's a historical reason for that, which itself has to do with the racialized history in American society. So I'm not trying to ignore that. But the day-to-day reality is that crime does need to be confronted. There does need to be resources and boots on the ground to do that. But there also needs to be a culture of trust and respect that allows for that to happen. And I didn't feel that it was the overall tendency of Black Lives Matter to sort of nurture that culture of trust and respect. I'll give you a couple of examples. I knew somebody who helped design a program called Police and Black Men in Minneapolis that started off creating sort of individual relationships between young Black men in Minneapolis and law enforcement, and it wound up growing into a flourishing program which had many participating cops, many participating members of the community.
Patrol groups.
It had community buy-in, right? And what happened is in the aftermath of George Floyd, the killing and murder of George Floyd. And I know some people don't look at it as a murder, but I hear you. But that's still kind of my point of view on it. But that good program, which was doing good work, wound up nearly collapsing because the social stigma on even having relationships with law enforcement was such that a lot of those Black folks couldn't participate in it anymore because they were getting criticized by people who didn't know Minneapolis and the law enforcement officers they were dealing with in the way that they knew them. And similarly in Los Angeles, now I don't know if it was Watts or Compton, it was one of the two, but I was here when you had Black Lives Matter protesters coming in from out of town who wanted to march, might have been through the projects, but who wanted to march in one of these areas and call out the LAPD, and local activists who had actually been in these conversations for a long time said, we don't need that. That's not helpful because things have actually been getting better here over recent years. And so, you paint with a broad brush about law enforcement and so on and so forth, and suddenly you adopt a one-size-fits-all combative solution, which doesn't always lead to consensus and progress, and sometimes can undermine the trust that's actually growing in certain areas.
I wanted to bring up, you made a great point about community policing, right? Community control, right? And we see several different municipalities outside of LA doing that already. But what I found that was interesting and telling that a lot of people on your side of the aisle didn't really center was when there was some community policing going on with Kyle Rittenhouse and his group of individuals and vigilantes.
Does that count? Does that count as community? Does Kyle Rittenhouse count? I mean, he's somebody from a community who's deciding to sort of help.
Well, he was with a community of folks, whether it be Proud Boys or Liberty First or those gun amendment individuals.
I'm gonna let you elaborate. Then I'm gonna respond to that.
Oh, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So what I felt that was quite interesting is that with those vigilante groups that worked with the police, by the way, the police said they needed help, right? They called on Proud Boys and these vigilante groups to help them. And these ex-military, I support the military. I don't want to get anything wrong, support them. But these were groups that were called upon to help police. If police have enough, right? If there are already enough police on the ground, why would they call extremist groups to go help them protect the city?
Are you saying that the police themselves called extremist
groups?
Yeah.
This has been documented. Yeah, okay. I mean,
I don't know about this.
Oh, you didn't know this?
No,
okay.
no. So you're saying that the police themselves sent up a smoke signal saying we need vigilante groups to come into our community.
Kyle Rittenhouse and his group.
I'm not believing or disbelieving you.
I'm just saying this has been documented.
It's new information for me.
This has been documented.
You may very well know something I don't know.
They reached out to the police department and said, we're going to help. We're going to be there. Police departments didn't say yes or they didn't say no. Right? And in my opinion, at that point, they should have said, we got this. We have enough money in our budget. Why do we need some vigilantes, right? But that community policing turned out to be really, really bad, right? In my opinion, if Kyle and his group of vigilantes weren't called or didn't go out and weren't armed, there wouldn't have been any shootings.
Yeah, right. So
that person wouldn't have died that day.
Yeah.
But that community policing in an already over-policed area, which you already said, more communities need more police. That community was already over-policed.
Yeah, just really quick, because I think that we got some common ground. Like I said,
Sure.
You're giving me some new information, so I want to learn more about it before I speak to that more specifically. I will say that, and this just gets back to the irony, though. I think that in many cases we actually need more police in order to actually adequately fulfill their function in certain contexts. Because even if the police aren't calling out vigilantes to get involved in a certain situation, if people feel unsafe, they're going to take their safety into their own hands with a great deal less training and credibility in order to be able to sort of effectuate that responsibly. And I think a lot of people would point to Kyle Rittenhouse as an example of that. Having said that, though, I would just say really quickly that when I think of community policing, and in fact in Los Angeles, I think it's a positive thing, but we essentially have a community policing bureau.
Yeah.
I think of methods of, and I'm not an expert on this, but I think of methods of policing that are much friendlier to sort of a philosophy of restorative justice, that are really defined by police officers being in relationship with the community and preempting the context in which violent crime arises through positive relationships. So when I think of community policing, I'm not thinking of vigilantism. I'm thinking about an approach to policing that's trying to leverage and build out the goodwill of the community. So that kind of community policing, I am inclined to feel sympathetic towards.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right, brother.
Thank you, man.
Appreciate you.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate you.
Likewise. Hey, man.
Faraz.
How you doing, Faraz?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good.
If you guys enjoy engaging in these kind of debates, discussion, conversations, and want to participate yourself, the Diamond Mountain Foundation is hosting an essay competition with cash prizes up to $3,000 for just speaking your mind and writing about topics like the ones in this video. So if you're interested, go to the first link in the description to learn more. Now let's get back to the video.
Can you clarify?
Yeah. So I think that on the whole, the Black Lives Matter movement had a negative effect on public safety and safety of our cities in really sort of two particular dimensions. One is in the area, of course, of the immediate effects of the protests and the riots themselves. I think it's been estimated that there's $1 to $2 billion worth of damage that unfolded during the course of the summer of 2020, protests and even riots that occurred in that context. And in that context, I think you had a lot of damage being done to local businesses. You had a lot of damage being done to members of the community. But then following on from that, and sort of in close relationship to what some people call the defund the police movement, I think you had a change in the culture of policing. I think that you had an impact in certain cases on municipal budgets, and changes in the way law enforcement was conducting itself that had the ironic impact of actually making some of the people less safe who it was the purpose of the movement to be able to protect in the first place. So that's my general point of view.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it. Yeah.
Do you not see the purpose of grassroots movements being revolutionarily have a violence towards them, or a anger directed towards property, because property is being valued far more than communities that the police are supposed to protect?
I hear where you're coming from. If you go back to the 1960s, of course, people are oftentimes inclined to cite Martin Luther King Jr., who's really my hero and my role model, more than anybody among the historical figures of the 20th century. And, Dr. King said that riots are the voice of the language of the oppressed, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that part of what you're getting at is the fact that people have deep and pent-up frustrations and passions against injustice, right? Mm-hmm. And that sometimes that expresses itself in a lashing out. We have to understand that context. And Dr. King understood that context, right? Mm-hmm. Dr. King was also not pro-riot by any means. And if you sort of trace his quotation, he goes on to talk about how this is antithetical to sort of the spirit of nonviolence that he represented, but that at the same time, he did not consider human lives, physical property, to be of equal value to human lives, right? So I do think that it's worth understanding that distinction. I recognize it, but I think that the question ultimately is, is the manner in which protests conducted ultimately conducive to creating an environment in which we can advance tangible solutions and progress for the things that people are protesting about. And as a means of getting there, are we calling people into the conversation rather than frightening people, damaging their livelihoods, damaging their community, even if it's coming from a place of some understandable grievance, right? In order to create a context in which we can address something as complex as criminal justice reform, right? And I just see the Black Lives Matter movement as, in many respects, having sort of allowed for there to be a space in which there's a lot of violence and damage done to property. But the thing is that also, in turn, shifts the politics of America in a way that makes it more difficult to find common ground on the sort of reform that people might like to see, right? So, that's really my critique, even if I can understand sort of where you're coming from in the revolutionary point of view, so to speak.
Okay, so what makes you gravitate towards Martin Luther King rather than Muhammad Ali or Malcolm X? I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, that's a beautiful question. The short answer to the question is that it is my point of view that Dr. King, well, he led with love as the actual spiritual animating force of his social activism, right? So through the power of agape love, he was able to speak to the conscience of people who disagreed with him. And through that means, made it possible to change hearts and minds in America in a way that ultimately added up to some durable changes in the landscape of not just civil rights, but American culture, things that continue to be positive for us to this day. That doesn't mean that Dr. King solved everything, but he tried to call people into the conversation, and he painted a picture of universal and shared humanity and even human brother and sisterhood, right? That I think made it easier for people to start to wrestle with the moral dimensions of segregation and racism in his own time, right? So it's easy to be angry, right? And people got justifiable reasons for being angry. People were justified in being angry about George Floyd, in my point of view. But if you want to make change and make progress, we still have a responsible obligation to pursue that change and progress in a way that is able to sort of bring people along for the ride while still being willing to speak truth to power. And so I see that as being the example of Martin Luther King.
Do you have any comment on, before he passed, apparently he had said he fears that he's led his people into a burning building?
Yeah, he said, I fear I've integrated,
sort of
I fear that we've integrated into a burning house, is what he said.
Do you have any comment on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, like I said a moment ago, all problems of American race relations were not solved with the civil rights movement. And what Dr. King was confronting at the end of his life was a reality that, on the one hand, the political accomplishments of civil rights reform was immense, but that, one, there was a lot that was very imperfect in terms of how integration was being implemented. There's a lot of token integration, where a lot of Black people didn't necessarily have real influence within American institutions, be it locally or more broadly speaking. And even more to the point, Dr. King felt that there was a great economic marginalization of Black people and an intense resistance, even from white people who had been allies of the civil rights movement earlier on, to then reckon with the economic justice question. And that quote was from one of those moments. But I would just point out to people that to his dying breath, Dr. King always stood by the philosophy of nonviolence as being both the most moral way to approach social justice and the most effective. And so, that was a stand that he never stepped away from.
I would agree to disagree just on the stance of it's the most moral, but it's not the most effective. But
Yeah,
that's just a disagreement.
it's a whole other conversation, man. And I'd love to have it as we get the time.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
It was a great one.
Brother, thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. BLM made police violence against African Americans seem more common than it was. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Nice meeting you also.
Nice to meet you too.
I really disagree with that statement because I live in Los Angeles. I see it up close and personal. This is something that happens a lot, the racial profiling, police stopping Black men for no reason. And they may not make it home that night because they're a black man driving or walking. This Black Lives Matter movement was an outcry because we don't want this anymore. We're tired. We've seen it so many times, so many years. So many black mothers have cried on national news talking about my son is dead. My son was killed. Most of the men that this has happened to by the hands of LAPD or a policeman, they were unarmed. We needed to make an outcry. We have marched many times, but I really don't see, maybe you can explain it to me. I really don't see how the protesting can make murdering a black man even more common than it is.
Yeah. Well, yes, seem more common, right? But let me just say that I feel like I have a good deal of sympathy with where you're coming from with this. And actually, I have a problem with the statement that I just made here too, because it says here, BLM made police violence against Black Americans seem more common than it is. Well, police violence against African Americans is disproportionate, right? It is actually the case that Black Americans experience more physical violence from police officers per capita on average, right, than do other groups. That is, I think, immensely supported by the data. The specific discrepancy that I think was, however, greatly embellished and exaggerated to the point of constituting a real problem for our societal ability to wrestle with the reality and the complexity of what was happening, is the idea that police killings of African Americans were much greater than they in fact are, right? Now, just a couple of sort of data points on that. Washington Post had a report some years back looking at available data from the municipal and the federal level and so forth, and came to the conclusion that, I forget the specific year, but it was 2018, 19, or 20. It was in that range, that you had somewhere between 9 and 15 unarmed African Americans killed by police in a given year. More African Americans in total, but in terms of unarmed African Americans, between about 9 and 15, and only about 1,000 or so Americans killed by police, period, within that same year. But if you look at polling data in terms of what most people, particularly more folks who are more self-identified, progressive and so forth, what they believed was true in terms of annual shooting deaths of African Americans by police in a given year, about 39% of people believed it was upwards of 1,000, right?
Most definitely.
Right, exactly. And so, now I actually happen to believe that 9 in a year figure is probably not correct. There's probably more.
It is
than
incorrect.
That. Well, I'm sure that it is, because there's a lot that needs to be improved in terms of how we collect data, and you always have to allow for the possibility of things being covered up, right? So I'm not trying to be naive about it. At the same time, though, I don't believe that it's anywhere near the thousands in a given year. But because people believed that it was in the thousands in a given year, it became relatively common for people to speak in terms of the genocide of young Black men by police, right? And so, look, if I actually believed that there was a genocide that was taking place against Black people in America, I would probably be acting much more extreme myself in response to that. I mean, it's, when you think about it against that backdrop, it's sort of understandable that certain people reacted the way that they did. But that's exactly the problem, because there is a problem. So there's I don't know if you're familiar with a researcher named Roland Fryer, Black man out of Harvard. He embedded himself in about 5 different police departments across the country. And I forget which ones exactly. One was Houston, one might have been Philly. So he was across a geographic range. And he looked at and observed in real time their data collection process. He reviewed their internal records. He had personal relationships with the cops and the community. And he came away with the assessment that there's really not much in terms of racially differentiated occurrences of police homicide towards African Americans, where cops are actually killing black people at rates disproportionate to that of whites if you factor in the increased rate of police encounters, because there are more violent crimes in inner city communities. And again, putting aside the historical reasons why. But he did notice the very thing I said up front, or just a moment ago, which is that in terms of just casual, sort of harassment, frisking, throwing a man on the hood of a police car, physically abusive sorts of engagements during the ordinary course of policing. Ordinary police interactions with black people tended to be significantly more violent on a statistical level than what you had with black people policing in white areas and particularly suburban communities and so forth. So, I'm not trying to, gloss over the idea that people were legitimately mad about something that was real, but when we recreated the reality to where it was not sort of broad-based police sort of harassment, but genocide, then, we're no longer in a place to where we can actually engage what's true and what the reality is, because suddenly people are in a fight and a flight mode when we don't have to be quite to that level of despair, I guess, in terms of the situation.
Okay, the man that you said did some research, I would have to look into that because I disagree with that research, because I have seen it up close and personal. I am a black woman living in America, and I see it on a regular basis. What happened to Eric Garner? He is not here because he was selling cigarettes in front of a store. That is common here in the city of Los Angeles and beyond, because we know that, what happened to George Floyd was in Minneapolis. It was in another state, but it's statewide. This violence, this killing of African-American men is statewide. It's all over the place. I cannot sit here and give you percentages. I can't give you data, but I can tell you what I've seen. I can tell you what my friends have seen, coworkers have seen, cousins and acquaintances have seen, what I've seen on the news. I can tell you that, but I can see lots of things on the news and not experience it myself. I've seen it. And it's a tragedy. So the killing of black men, the harassing of black men, this has got to stop. And Black Lives Matter movement must go on. I think that there should be stricter laws regarding what a policeman can do to detain you.
Yeah, right.
When you have handcuffs on, you cannot resist arrest.
Yeah.
How can you stop anybody from doing anything to you when you have no use of your hands? You can't do anything with your hands. You may say something, but you can't do anything. And the police can say anything to you. They can drop drugs in your car and say you were resisting arrest when they just stopped you and they said your tail light is broken when your tail light is not broken.
This is why body cam seemed like an important
exactly, but many times they turn
reform.
that body cam off. I don't know if you've heard that.
Oh, I have heard that. Yeah.
But we need these laws to be strict. We need these laws in place so that we can see a man who is on his way home from work make it home.
Right. And and even, part of the defense that some people make of Derek Chauvin is that the maneuver he was utilizing to subdue George Floyd was actually a sanctioned and therefore legal practice.
It was sanctioned by
the department. And that's what I've heard claimed. Now, I haven't chased that claim all the way down. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But I would just say that if it is true, then that suggests that the problem is not just Derek Chauvin, but a larger practice on an institutional level that needs to be engaged. So I'm just saying that to sort of your point, that these are areas that I think are ripe for and worthy for a serious conversation around attention and reform, right? And so I think that the lived experience of a person like yourself, and I think myself and others in the community who have experience and relationships to these issues is vital for informing those questions, right? Because, a thing can be legal and not be right. A thing can be authorized, but not be good or effective, right? And my hope would be that you said that we need Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter must continue. Honestly, I would be happy for Black Lives Matter to continue and to grow and evolve as we all must do to help shine a light on these issues, as it actually has, right? Now, you've heard all my other criticisms, but I do give Black Lives Matter credit at least for shining a light on this general kind of landscape of problems with the conduct of law enforcement. Now let's sharpen that focus to get to the concrete reforms that can translate towards changing the relationship between the people and the police for the better.
Yes, that you mean maybe shining a brighter light, because people know about the police brutality regarding Chauvin.
And a more precise light, I mean, I think is what I'm arguing too, because you're talking about specifics, and I think that's a good thing.
Yes. George Floyd and this police Chauvin had already had run-ins.
Yeah.
He already had it in for George Floyd. I believe this was something personal. This was vengeance. I have never heard that holding a knee on the back of someone's neck was sanctioned. This is something that he wanted George to know. I'm the boss around here. You do everything I tell you to do. Even though Mr. Floyd told him, I am claustrophobic. I don't want to get into the car. And he tried to make him get into the car. But George went around to the other side of the car because he said, I can't do that. I can't get in there. And so he said, I'll lay on the ground. So they put him on the ground on his stomach. And that's when Chauvin put his knee on his neck for 9 minutes. And he told him, I can't breathe. But that didn't matter because he had it in for this man.
Hey, man, how you doing? Nice to meet you too, brother. I need to hire your fashion consultant, or hire you as my fashion consultant, man. You're styling over here.
Hire me for help on your views too. So.
Yeah, I hear you.
I mean, I've been listening to what you say. I respect your opinion, but I think only a complete idiot would agree with you. So I guess I'll let you get started, and I can tell you why you're wrong. And
I can show you how much of an idiot I am. I'm sure I'm an idiot on any number.
It's an opportunity to educate yourself by talking to someone like me who actually knows the research.
Oh man, I'm in luck. But no, let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, so part of what I said a moment ago was that I think Skeptic Research conducted polling to indicate that 39% or so of self-identified liberals and progressives, and they're not the only source, when asked how many shootings of African Americans by police take place in a given year, gave an answer in upwards of 1,000, so into the thousands. Whereas available data tends to show that police killing of unarmed African Americans could be as low as 9 in a given year. Of course, I've already said that I think that data is likely incorrect, but that the real figure, it's virtually impossible to imagine that it approaches the scale at which we kind of tend to think the problem actually exists, right? So there's a big difference between single digits and 4 digits, right?
I mean, the only thing I agree with you there is that data is, I mean, let's face it, data, pretty much all data is a big joke anyway. I mean, who's really conducting these polls?
As a matter of principle, though, I mean, are you saying that data just
I could
in
probably put a
principle
post up on Facebook making up some number and you'd have like a few 100 million people believing it because most people are just idiots, you know what I mean?
Well, but can I ask you, like, are you familiar with the methodologies by which?
I mean, what are you even getting this data from? I mean, can you even source it?
Well, the Washington Post conducted a survey of a number of select municipalities and the available FBI statistics to arrive at the figure that they generated. I will admit that I didn't look too closely at the sources and methods of Skeptic Research. I mean, we live in a crazy time because we're all drinking from a fire hose of information. This is why I try to come into these conversations, honestly, brother, without a lot of ego, because I'm willing to learn from you, man. If you've got a perspective or an understanding on the flaws in the data set, you know, or if you've got more reliable sources and information that you could point me to, man, I'm willing to learn, brother. I'm begging to learn. I'm waiting to be educated. I don't want to be an idiot for any longer than I have to be. But I think you and I would probably both agree that just by function of being human beings, you're going to be wrong about things. We all are here. And by the way, this is a really important statement. We're all trusting sources of information that in the vast main we ourselves are not the ones conducting, right? In other words, I'm not directly doing the data gathering. Unless you're a statistician who's working specifically in this field, you're not doing the data gathering relevant here. So there's a degree to which we're, people in general are trusting some of these different sources. And that does leave room for error, man. So if you can point out to me, but you still have to point out where the discrepancies arise, right? As opposed to just kind of saying, well, I just don't believe stuff because I don't believe stuff.
I have this one-of-a-kind custom exotic car. And my background.
I believe it somehow.
Yeah.
Car goes with the outfit, I'm sure.
Yeah, my background's Asian. So one day I'm driving on the highway. I'm late for a meeting. I think I'm going about like 135, 140. So probably about 70, 80 miles over the speed limit.
Okay.
And then I get pulled over.
As tends to happen when you're going that fast.
No ticket. The cop actually apologized to me for pulling me over because I told him I'm late for a meeting. I'm sorry. There's nobody on the highway. So
he was just so impressed with the car and with your
it's
gravitas.
obviously I'm Asian. He's probably thinking, yeah, this guy isn't a threat. He's not.
You weren't who he was looking for.
So I'll give you the other side of this. So a couple weeks later, my friend who's very educated, African American with a PhD, he's taking like some hot blonde girl on a date and he wants to borrow my car. So I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Why not? He's driving around top down with this blonde in the car, gets pulled over, gets sent to jail for a stolen car.
I see.
What do you think about that?
So yeah,
and I had to bail him out. So why do you think he wasn't speeding, wasn't doing anything wrong?
Yeah, right. Well, look, I mean,
what do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, I'm not. Let me speak to a couple parts of this. I think that the greatest travesty of American racism in the present day is the way in which it is locked in place a segment of our community that traces its history from slavery to the terrorism of the Ku Klux Klan to redlining to being blocked out of the organized labor force in America to Jim Crow segregation to observing the decapitation of African American leadership to economic disenfranchisement by way of insourcing of immigration, outsourcing of manufacturing, a corrupted relationship, I would say, to public benefits and so on and so forth, the advent of crack cocaine, the mass incarceration phenomenon in a way that has ensured that for poor black people like George Floyd, located where they are on the socioeconomic totem pole in American life, across the entire arc of American experience from slavery up to Rodney King and even to the present moment for some 20 or 30% of African Americans who experience nothing in the way of social mobility and are locked into crime-ridden, underserviced inner cities, the American dream never shows up.
Christopher.
Good to meet you, Christopher.
John, right?
Yes.
Pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're from Culver City?
Yeah, pretty much. I was born in Inglewood. I grew up in Culver City.
So I'm curious, you've made a number of points with which I think are apt, but perhaps we can agree that, politics and social movements and policy itself, it's not necessarily all logical and linear, and a lot of your comments have been rife with the implicit point that there's such an emotional communitarian aspect to all of this, right?
Definitely.
So, it's not necessarily just about addressing facts, but also feelings, right? That's what makes politics so fascinating and messy. And one of the points that I was kind of looking into between the lines in your previous conversations with other members of this group is that, police officers themselves are, demographically in their lived experience quite eclectic, right? You've got people who think that there's been a lot of interest, or we can hope there's been a lot of interest in recruiting police officers whose lived experience have a certain compassion, although enforcing the law and a sense of justice, have a certain compassion for the stories and for the experiences of people who are living in communities where there are higher incidents of crime, right? On the other hand, we have police officers, many of whom I'm sure live in Simi Valley, perhaps the highest per capita residential community of police officers in the whole country, maybe who aren't so empathetic. So I'd be curious, what do you think is perhaps the way to, is to create a culture of policing? In my view, it's perhaps even bullshit to have, or it's inefficacious, shall we say. It's ineffective to just have bias training. To me, that seems like a Band-Aid solution. It seems like it's a lot deeper. And I know police officers have an enforcer personality towards the rules, but in some sense, at a deeper level, it seems to me like it would be a lot more effective to have police officers who understand the community, aren't just sitting here judging people as, poor, criminal, and black or brown, but saying, I get this person's point of view. We need to keep the community safe, but we also, need to work with people so we can create an LA and an America that is, productive for all.
That works. Well, I do think that when you enter into the work of policing, specifically when you are policing across thick cultural lines, right? So you're not just policing people who you kind of can relate to in a native sort of way. You're from the neighborhood, or you've lived in a class or a cultural environment that's similar to the people that you're policing day by day. But you're policing people whose experience and view of the world is radically different from your own, compounded by the fact that you look different than all of them, right? Then, you're walking into an environment in which there's a good deal, I think, of not just, empathy in the abstract, but sort of psychological sophistication and cultural understanding that needs to come to bear in the context of that relationship if you are not going to feel like an alien to the people that you are protecting and serving. Because if you do feel like an alien to them, they're not going to trust you. It's going to be much more difficult for you to do your job, and you're going to experience a level of hostility in many cases that are going to make you cynical towards the people who you're supposed to be serving. So, I think that a couple things. One, I think that there needs to be an area of social and psychological, but really civic innovation where we build out the space. And, again, I do think that this is part of what community policing is about, but where we build out the space for officers and members of the community to develop relationships outside of direct conflicts, outside of direct context in the process of policing. I imagine that there is likely more space, and we'll get people in the comments, probably edifying us on this point, but I imagine that in the police training process.
Thank you to everyone who's making comments and expanding on the conversation.
Exactly.
Can we just make that explicit point to the audience?
There you go.
We welcome additional
the
points.
This is not a final dialogue.
Expansive.
By any means. And I think neither of us are experts, but we're Americans who care about, our communities, right?
Absolutely.
We've got an obligation to actually have the conversation in the right way. But I imagine that there's probably space within the procedures and protocols of police training to expand cultural sensitivity in a meaningful way. I mean, I know that the phrase cultural sensitivity seems like a bit of a cliche, and it probably is a cliche in many contexts, but doesn't eliminate the fact that it matters. I also am going to say this, two things. One, I actually think that police should be paid more, just like I think teachers should be paid more, because I want us to be able to attract the best possible people to be able to engage in that work. And two, just to bring it back to a criticism I have of Black Lives Matter and the defund the police sort of movement that was kind of an offshoot of that or related to that. Most police departments in America did not actually radically reduce their budgets. I'm sensitive to the defunding of the police issue because that was a thing here in Los Angeles, which is historically under-policed, I would argue. But outside of LA and Portland and Berkeley, there are not too many examples you can find. A lot of places ratcheted up their police budgets. But what wound up happening is that the social stigma attached to even being a cop made a lot of good cops retire. And a lot of other good people who might have been police didn't want to take on that job because it was like, as soon as I put on that badge, I'm a villain. Why would I want to do that?
We can definitely agree there's been a recruitment problem that might be pervasive across the United States. But the question I'd have, the police budget issue, there's so much overtime. And I know, at least in New York, where I used to live, many police officers are making six figures. So the question is, I think that the critical mass of Americans agree that police do have a role to play in maintaining public safety with stipulations. I know there's debate over ending qualified immunity, whether or not to cash bail, body cams. And if we can discuss some productive, offshoots of BLM, it certainly has been shall we say, catalyzing body cams, building more awareness and support among other racial groups for crimes that have been targeted against members of the Black community.
And the sister who spoke before you, I think, was right in celebrating the multiracial coalition that came together around this issue. I mean, even if I have pretty deep criticisms of Black Lives Matter, that was a beautiful thing to see in principle. In some way, that was a fulfillment of what Dr. King was striving
as a vehicle for social change. We can agree, I'm sure, BLM's leaders buying the home in Sherman Oaks that was used for private parties is an example of corruption. So BLM itself, the organization, has certainly some corruption embedded within it, or rather corrupt misuse of resources, shall we say. But the energy behind it of instituting a racial of equity and fairness for all, that's a noble goal, and inclusion for all, of having, in terms of policing and societal decisions, that's a noble goal. We definitely agree on. I've heard, you probably are more of a moderate conservative, and I've read some of your USA Today op-eds to prepare.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're a capable writer.
Take every click I can get.
What's that?
I'll take every click I can get.
Well, yeah, why not, right?
Yeah.
But, at the same time, I think we can agree that there are some problems with the BLM organization's actions, but the movement itself and the energy needs to continue in ways that are productive towards the goals that we all share. The question is, what's the right way to institute it? You made a great point earlier on, I think you said there were $1 or $2 billion of property damage, and one of the brothers, I think, I heard him. He said that was an effective goal, although, but there was another adjective that was used. Was it effective? It depends on one's interpretation of that.
I think it backfired in a tremendous way. I mean, and honestly, I think that in the pendulum swinging nature of things, that fact ultimately contributed significantly to the reelection of President Trump, along with many other things that were downstream of those protests. I mean, in general, I think that Americans, certainly many white people and many people within institutions and so forth, who you would have ideally wanted to have brought into a coalition, or at least, encouraged to be sympathetic to the fundamental kind of motivations of the movement, instead felt attacked across every sector of society. And lo and behold, President Trump was there with a sword and a shield to say, I'm your hero, I'm your champion, and I'm going to fight back for you, right? So, but to get back to some of the other things that you were saying, I mean, just a couple of points. I mean, one, on the Black Lives Matter global foundation. I mean, you mentioned the misuse of funds and so on and so forth. I just want to just take that opportunity to just make a general statement, because I work in the world of nonprofits. I work, sort of adjacent to philanthropy, as well as sort of in the civic space and so on and so forth. Just as a general matter, if you care about a social cause, and I'm not, I'm just, again, not even, I'm going general here. The Black Lives Matter Foundation, that's its own thing. As a general matter, you have to really take seriously the responsibility of stewarding the people's funds, at least as much as the government should, right?
Touche.
Because when people donate to your organization, they are doing so entrusting you with conveying their conviction that a problem of injustice or inequality needs to be responded to, and that you're going to make a good faith effort towards using those funds in that direction. But, you know, I mean, we know this happens all the time in corporate America, but it happens in the NPO space too, where sometimes, you know, we don't always use funds in the way that, you know, we should, because we're all, and I'm, you know, like, I'm somebody who takes, you know, his faith seriously. In my own religious vantage point, I see us all as being born in sin. I see us all as being vulnerable to temptation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't, you know, permanently condemn anybody for making a mistake, but we have to hold ourselves accountable in how we steward one another's resources so that we can trust each other in the effort to build impactful social change and civic reform in America. So there's a lesson to be learned, I think, in some of the history that you're referring to. But beyond that, I think you said, and I know others have said, that we want to, ultimately, you want to see the BLM energy continue. Now, it feels like the BLM wave has greatly dissipated. But I do think that the greater quest towards meaningful civic empowerment for all people in America, and particularly those who are historic victims of the legacy of racism and inequality that is very real in our country's history and does have ramifications in the present moment. That historic work, I do believe, needs to continue, but I want to see it continue according to the higher philosophies of conscience that has guided that work in the past. I want to see that continue according to the philosophy of nonviolence as it was taught by Martin Luther King Jr., by Bayard Rustin, as it was exemplified in the work of Septima Clark, that continues and honors the legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer, and so many others. I think that there is a spiritually noble way of approaching these questions that, again, does not gloss over the truth and the validity and the seriousness of injustice, but still manages to reach out in a spirit of love that calls even skeptical and oppositional forces into the conversation. And it is upon that enduring foundation that I hope that the overall social justice movement continues onwards into the future.